The holographic display flickered, casting Dr. Elena Rodriguez's shadow across the bunker's cold metal walls. Her fingers, scared from years of emergency response and environmental restoration, traced the rapidly deteriorating global systems map. Red zones pulsed like open wounds, megacities drowning, agricultural regions turning to dust, atmospheric carbon levels so high they'd become a death sentence. 12 kilometers beneath her, in the subterranean archives of what was once the United Nations headquarters, the weight of human history pressed against reinforced walls. Centuries of conflicts, technological advances, and ecological negligence had culminated in this moment. Humanity's final examination. Colonel Marcus Okoro stood to her left, a veteran of countless humanitarian missions, his cybernetic eye, a replacement from a rescue operation in the flooded Bangladesh Delta, scanned the data with mechanical precision. 72 hours, he muttered, echoing Elena's earlier declaration. We've got less time than that, and everyone in this room knows it. The emergency council was unlike any previous gathering. No pristine conference rooms, no diplomatic niceties. This was survival stripped to its bare essence. Representatives sat shoulder to shoulder, some physically present, others joining via quantum-encrypted holographic interfaces. An indigenous leader from the Amazon, displaced by decades of environmental collapse. A Chinese atmospheric engineer. A former Silicon Valley technology executive. A Kenyan water resource specialist. Climate refugees turned global problem solvers. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a biomechanical engineer from Japan, pulled up a series of complex simulations. Our previous models were catastrophically conservative, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The feedback loops in global climate systems have accelerated beyond our worst predictions. We're not looking at gradual change anymore. We're witnessing planetary system failure. A silence descended, not of despair, but of raw, calculated determination. Elena knew this moment intimately. She had spent her entire career watching humanity dance on the razor's edge of extinction. Her groundbreaking work in climate restoration had earned her multiple Nobel Prizes, but prizes meant nothing in the face of total ecological collapse. We have 3 options, she began, her voice cutting through the tension. Complete capitulation, fragmented survival, or collective transformation. The room understood the implications. Capitulation meant accepting extinction. Fragmented survival would result in isolated, desperate communities, fighting over the last scraps of habitable land. Collective transformation was their only hope, a solution so radical it seemed impossible. Colonel Okoro stepped forward, activating a secure communication channel that bypassed every existing governmental infrastructure. We're initiating Protocol Lazarus, he announced. No explanation was needed. Every person in the room understood the magnitude of that declaration. Protocol Lazarus was more than an emergency plan. It was a complete reset of human civilization, a mechanism developed in absolute secrecy by a network of scientists, military strategists, and political visionaries who had seen the inevitable collapse coming for decades. The plan required something unprecedented, total global cooperation. Not collaboration, not compromise, but a fundamental reimagining of human potential. Dr. Aisha Patel, a quantum systems theorist from India, began uploading comprehensive data sets. Centuries of human knowledge, scientific research, cultural insights, technological innovations were being consolidated into a single adaptive intelligence network. It was more than an algorithm. It was humanity's collective memory and potential, distilled into a living system. We're not just saving a species, Yuki muttered, watching the data streams merge. We're giving birth to a new form of human civilization. Outside the bunker, the world continued its descent into chaos. Megastorms ravaged coastlines. Artificial intelligence systems designed to manage infrastructure were overwhelmed. Communication networks flickered and died. But here, in this moment, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm of human potential. Elena looked around the room. These were not just representatives of nations or interests. They were the architects of human survival. Each carried the weight of their people's history, their hopes, their desperate need to survive. 72 hours, she repeated. But this time, it wasn't a countdown to extinction. It was a countdown to rebirth. The first weeks of the Terran Collective were brutal. Transformation never comes without pain. In the ruins of Sao Paulo, Raquel Oliveira watched as her makeshift reconstruction unit battled more than physical destruction. They were fighting generations of ingrained mistrust. Her team comprised former soldiers from conflicts that had once seemed irreconcilable. A Chilean drone specialist working alongside a Venezuelan infrastructure engineer, a Nigerian quantum computing expert collaborating with a Russian materials scientist. Their current project, rebuilding a critical water filtration and energy generation complex that would serve millions. But the real engineering wasn't happening with machines. It was happening between people. We're not just fixing infrastructure, Miguel Santana, the team's lead structural engineer, would repeat during their nightly strategy sessions. We're rebuilding trust. The global AI system, nicknamed ARAE, Adaptive Reconstruction Intelligence Algorithm, tracked every resource, every human movement, every potential conflict with unprecedented precision. But ARIA was more than a management tool. Developed by a collective of neuroscientists, sociologists, and computer engineers, it was designed to understand human complexity. In the former United Nations headquarters, now the Terran Collective's Global Coordination Center, Dr. Kamat Okik reviewed the latest integration metrics. The challenges were staggering. Decades of economic inequality, cultural divisions, and geopolitical tensions couldn't be erased overnight. A holographic display showed real-time conflict resolution scenarios. Where traditional peacekeeping forces would have deployed military units, the collective's approach was surgical and psychological. Teams of conflict mediators, equipped with advanced empathy training and cultural intelligence protocols, moved into potential flashpoints before violence could erupt. One such team worked in the fractured regions of the Middle East, led by Dr. Fatima Al-Rashid, a Lebanese-Canadian conflict resolution specialist. They didn't arrive with weapons or demands. They came with listening devices, translation algorithms, and a revolutionary approach to understanding generational trauma. We're not here to impose peace, she would tell local leaders. We're here to help you redesign your future. The economic transformation was equally radical. Traditional monetary systems collapsed, replaced by a dynamic resource allocation model that valued human potential over accumulated wealth. Every individual received a comprehensive life development package: education, healthcare, housing, and the tools to contribute meaningfully to global reconstruction. In the former Silicon Valley, now a massive educational and innovation hub, young engineers worked on projects that would have been considered impossible a decade earlier. A team developing atmospheric carbon reclamation technology included members from 12 different countries, their communication seamless thanks to neural-linked translation systems. But the transformation wasn't without resistance. Corporate remnants and nationalist holdouts formed underground networks, attempting to disrupt the collective's efforts. These weren't mere terrorist groups. They were sophisticated resistance movements with their own complex motivations. Colonel Marcus Okoro's special integration units didn't fight these groups. They infiltrated, understood, and ultimately transformed them. By addressing root causes: economic disenfranchisement, cultural displacement, psychological trauma, they dismantled resistance through understanding, not force. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in the Andean reconstruction zones. A group of former narcotics traffickers, faced with a system that offered genuine economic opportunity and personal development, became some of the most effective environmental restoration specialists. Their intimate knowledge of mountain ecosystems, combined with advanced biotechnology, allowed them to restore damaged landscapes at an unprecedented rate. ARIA processed these human transformations with a kind of algorithmic wonder. Each successful integration, each moment of genuine human connection, was more than a data point. It was evidence of a species reinventing itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from her research station in the restored Amazon basin, understood the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just survival. This was evolution. We're not fixing a broken system, she would later write in her groundbreaking analysis. We're creating the first truly adaptive human civilization. As the first year of the Terran Collective drew to a close, the planet began to heal. Not through technological miracle, but through a fundamental reimagining of human potential. Borders dissolved. Resources were shared. Knowledge became a universal right. The old world was dying, and something extraordinary was being born. The Zorvax diplomatic vessel materialized at the edge of the solar system like a crystalline nightmare, all angular precision and biomechanical complexity. Captain Zexler felt the first tremor of uncertainty ripple through his neural network, an emotion so unfamiliar it almost felt like a system error. Their long-range sensors had been tracking Earth for centuries. Decades of observations painted a picture of a species perpetually on the brink of self-destruction. Fractured, violent, predictable. This was supposed to be a routine preliminary contact, a formality before assimilation. Nothing could have prepared them for the response. The communication burst that arrived was unlike anything in the Zorvax diplomatic archives. It wasn't just a message. It was a multi-layered quantum communication that seemed to breathe with intelligence. Linguistic patterns shifted and adapted in real time, simultaneously translating complex cultural contexts that would have taken standard sino-linguistic processors months to decode. Dr. Mei Chen, lead sino-communications specialist for the Terran Collective, worked with a team that defied every traditional approach to first contact. Her background was a microcosm of the new human paradigm. Born in a refugee settlement, educated through global neural networks, with expertise spanning quantum linguistics, cultural anthropology, and advanced systems theory. "They're watching us," she murmured to her colleague, Dr. Ahmed Nkosi, a communication systems engineer. "And they have no idea what they're seeing." The Zorvax communication protocols were rigid, hierarchical, built on millions of years of a civilization that understood power as a strict, immutable hierarchy. Humanity's response was a symphony of complexity. Each transmission was a living document, filled with layers of meaning that shifted and adapted. Inside the diplomatic vessel, Captain Zixler's senior xenoanalyst, sub-coordinator Vexnel, ran increasingly complex simulations. The human response defied every predictive model. It was as if the communication itself was alive, learning, adapting, reaching out with an intelligence that wasn't just computational, but fundamentally organic. "They're not responding to our protocols," Vexnel reported, a note of confusion bleeding through the standard communication filters. "They're rewriting them." The Terran Collective's approach was deliberate. This wasn't about demonstrating superiority. It was an invitation, a complex, multidimensional hello that carried the entire weight of human potential. Dr. Chen had spent years preparing for this moment. The communication package they'd prepared wasn't just a message. It was a comprehensive cultural and scientific overview that functioned like a living organism. Mathematical theorems danced with cultural narratives. Quantum mechanical principles intertwined with indigenous storytelling techniques. Scientific data merged with artistic expressions. "We're showing them who we are," she explained to the global coordination team. "Not as a threat, not as a species to be conquered, but as potential partners in something greater." The Zorvax vessel's internal systems began to experience what could only be described as cognitive dissonance. Their long-range observations of humanity suggested a species of violent, short-sighted creatures. But this communication suggested something else entirely, a civilization of adaptive, deeply interconnected beings. Deep within the vessel's communication core, translation matrices began to collapse and rebuild themselves. The human message was rewriting their fundamental understanding of intelligent communication. Zexular watched in growing unease as standard diplomatic protocols became increasingly irrelevant. This wasn't first contact. This was something else entirely. A secondary transmission arrived. A package so complex that it took the vessel's primary computational systems several minutes to begin processing. It wasn't just information. It was an invitation, a challenge, a possibility. We are not what you expect, the message seemed to say. We are something more. In the Terran Collective's Global Coordination Center, Dr. Chen allowed herself the smallest of smiles. First contact was never about showing strength. It was about showing potential. And humanity was just getting started. The challenges arrived encrypted within quantum probability matrices, impossible puzzles designed to break the spirit of any species foolish enough to attempt them. The Zorvax called it the Nexus Protocol, a series of tests so complex they had systematically eliminated 17 civilizations over the past 3 galactic cycles. Dr. Imani Okoro studied the first transmission with a combination of scientific rigor and pure, unbridled excitement. Her workspace, a holographic research platform suspended above the reclaimed forests of what was once the Democratic Republic of Congo, hummed with collaborative energy. "This isn't just a test," she muttered to her neural-linked research partner, Dr. Lai Wei, whose avatar materialized from a quantum communication node. "This is a deliberate attempt to demonstrate the impossibility of our existence." The first challenge appeared deceptively simple. A quantum entanglement problem that required simultaneous resolution across 12 different dimensional matrices. Traditional computational approaches would take millennia. The Zorvax expected computational failure, a demonstration of human technological limitations. What they received instead was something entirely unexpected. Yasmin Abdullah, a 27-year-old systems theorist from Cairo, approached the problem through a methodology that merged traditional Arabic geometric problem-solving with cutting-edge quantum neural networking. Her solution didn't just solve the problem. It transformed the very nature of the challenge. The research team watched in collective awe as Yasmin's approach created what could only be described as a living algorithm. It wasn't just a solution. It was an evolving system of problem resolution that seemed to breathe with intelligence. Dr. Okoro's neural implants captured the moment of breakthrough. The solution wasn't linear. It wasn't even three-dimensional. It was a complex, adaptive system that rewrote the fundamental understanding of computational problem-solving. "They're trying to prove we're limited," Dr. Wei observed, his holographic form shifting with excitement. "Instead, we're showing them the meaning of unlimited potential." The second challenge arrived moments later. A diplomatic scenario so complex it had broken the communication systems of multiple advanced civilizations. It involved simultaneous negotiations between 5 different species, each with conflicting cultural imperatives, technological constraints, and existential motivations. The Terran Collective's response team wasn't selected through traditional diplomatic channels. They were chosen by Araya, the adaptive intelligence system that had become humanity's cognitive backbone. Dr. Fatima Al-Rashid led the team, a group that represented a truly global perspective. There was Marcus Rodriguez, a conflict resolution specialist whose family history spanned 3 continents. Alongside him, Dr. Akiko Tanaka, a neurolinguistic expert who could decode communication patterns at a molecular level. Their third member was Ibrahim Khan, a systems philosopher who understood conflict as a complex, adaptive system rather than a binary problem. The diplomatic challenge wasn't about winning. It was about finding a solution that elevated all participants. "We're not here to defeat the problem," Marcus explained during their preparation. "We're here to transform it." Their solution was so elegant, so fundamentally different from expected diplomatic approaches, that the Zorvax observation team initially believed their communication systems had malfunctioned. Instead of traditional negotiation, the human team introduced a collaborative framework that treated the conflict as a shared evolutionary challenge. They didn't compromise. They didn't compete. They created an entirely new paradigm of interaction that made the original conflict irrelevant. Sub-Coordinator Vexnal, monitoring the transmission, felt something unprecedented surge through their neural networks. It wasn't just data. It was something closer to what biological beings might call wonder. The Zorvacs had designed these challenges to demonstrate humanity's limitations. Instead, humanity was demonstrating the limitless nature of collaborative intelligence. As the final analysis of the challenge was transmitted back to the Zorvac's diplomatic vessel, Captain Zixler realized something fundamental had changed. This was no longer about first contact. This was about understanding a species that didn't just challenge expectations, they rewrote them entirely. The quantum nexus drive wasn't born in a laboratory. It emerged from the collective imagination of humanity's most unlikely collaborators. Dr. Arya Patel's research station perched on the edge of what was once the Atacama Desert, now a thriving ecological restoration zone. Around her, a team that defied every traditional conception of scientific collaboration worked with an intensity that bordered on ritual. There was Dr. Jun Kim, a quantum physicist whose family had survived the devastation of the Korean Peninsula. Beside him, Rafael Santos, an indigenous environmental engineer who carried millennia of ecological knowledge in his neural implants. Zara Nkomo, a computational linguist from Zimbabwe, moved between holographic interfaces with a dancer's grace. They weren't just scientists. They were storytellers, dreamers, survivors. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine systems check. Raphael was explaining an ancient navigation technique used by his ancestors, a method of reading stellar movements that predated modern astronomical technology. As he spoke, Jun's quantum computational models began to shift, revealing patterns that modern science had overlooked. "It's not about seeing the universe," Zora murmured, her fingers dancing across quantum interface nodes. "It's about listening to it." The quantum nexus drive was more than a propulsion system. It was a conversation with the fundamental fabric of space-time. Traditional faster-than-light travel theories had always approached space as something to be conquered, manipulated, overcome. The human approach was different. They saw space as a living system, a complex, adaptive network that could be communicated with, not dominated. Their computational models incorporated elements that would have been dismissed as pseudoscience mere decades earlier: indigenous knowledge systems, ecological understanding, philosophical frameworks that saw technology not as a tool of control, but as a method of relationship. The first test came unexpectedly. During a routine simulation, the research team discovered that the drive's computational matrix was absorbing and integrating information in ways no one had predicted. It wasn't just calculating. It was learning. Dr. Patel watched in awe as the system began to generate its own computational pathways. Mathematical models twisted and reformed, creating solutions to problems that hadn't even been asked yet. "We're not developing a technology," she said to her team. "We're midwifing a new form of intelligence." The Zorvac's monitoring systems detected the initial tests and immediately misunderstood their significance. They saw a promising technological development. What they missed was the fundamental revolution happening beneath the surface. This wasn't just about faster-than-light travel. This was about reimagining the very nature of movement, of connection, of existence. The drive's first true test came during a seemingly impossible scenario. A research station near Jupiter had gone silent, trapped in a complex gravitational anomaly that should have been fatal. Traditional rescue missions would have been suicide. The Quantum Nexus team didn't send a rescue mission. They sent a communication. Dr. Kim's computational model suggested something radical. The anomaly wasn't a threat. It was a form of communication. The research station wasn't in danger. It was in dialogue with something humanity had never understood before. When the station's crew returned, they spoke of an experience that defied every known scientific understanding. They hadn't been rescued. They had been invited into a conversation with the universe itself. Sub-Coordinator Vexnell, analyzing the transmission, felt something approaching genuine confusion. The human technological leap wasn't just about advanced systems. It was about a fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. The quantum nexus drive became more than a method of transportation. It was a bridge between known and unknown, between technological possibility and collective imagination. As the first full-scale tests began, humanity watched with a sense of collective anticipation. This wasn't just a technological achievement. This was an invitation to the universe. The war began in silence. Deep within the quantum communication networks, invisible battles raged long before the first physical weapon was deployed. Commander Elena Rice watched the initial infiltration unfold from her coordination hub, a mobile command center that existed simultaneously in multiple quantum states. The Zorvax hadn't simply assembled a military fleet. They had orchestrated a multi-dimensional attack strategy that targeted the very foundations of human civilization. Computational viruses designed to disrupt critical infrastructure. Psychological warfare algorithms crafted to exploit potential fracture points in human society. Economic destabilization protocols that would have collapsed any traditional civilization within hours. What they didn't understand was that the Terran Collective was no longer a traditional civilization. Dr. Kama Okik, lead systems resilience specialist, approached the incoming threat with the calm of someone solving an intricate puzzle. His team wasn't just defending. They were transforming the very nature of the attack. They're looking for vulnerabilities, he explained to the global coordination team. We're going to give them something entirely unexpected. The first wave of Zorvax infiltration hit what appeared to be critical infrastructure nodes. Quantum communication relays, energy distribution networks, global resource management systems. In any previous human civilization, these would have been devastating strikes. Instead, the attacks became something else entirely. Yasmin Abdullah, the systems theorist who had previously solved the impossible quantum entanglement challenge, had developed a revolutionary approach to cyber defense. Rather than blocking or destroying incoming threats, her systems absorbed them, analyzed them, transformed them. Each Zorvax attack algorithm became a learning opportunity. The human defense network didn't just resist, it evolved. Commander Rice watched in real time as the attacks became increasingly bizarre. Infiltration algorithms designed to cause maximum damage began to modify themselves. Some started generating complex artistic patterns. Others developed what could only be described as rudimentary emotional responses. They're not fighting anymore, Dr. Okik observed. They're communicating. The Zorvax fleet, observing from their quantum-shielded positions, became increasingly confused. Their most sophisticated attack strategies were being not just neutralized, but fundamentally altered. Sub-Coordinator Vexnel's communication matrices began to experience what could only be described as existential uncertainty. The human response defied every known strategic model. On the physical battlefield, the conflict took equally unexpected turns. Traditional military engagement became obsolete. Human defensive units didn't just fight. They adapted, transformed, created. A squadron of adaptive combat drones, led by Captain Marcus Rodriguez, demonstrated a level of situational awareness that seemed to blur the line between technology and consciousness. They didn't just respond to threats. They anticipated. They learned. They solved. During one critical engagement near the Kuiper Belt, a small human defensive unit found themselves surrounded by a Zorvax assault fleet that outnumbered them 50-1. Traditional military doctrine would have suggested surrender or total destruction. Instead, they initiated a strategy that could only be described as collaborative disruption. The human unit began broadcasting complex mathematical sequences, cultural narratives, philosophical inquiries. Their communication wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation to understanding. The Zorvax fleet found itself increasingly uncertain. Were they under attack? Were they being studied? Were they being invited into a conversation? Captain Zezular, monitoring the conflict from the primary diplomatic vessel, felt something unprecedented surge through the collective neural network of the Zorvax command structure. This wasn't a war. This was first contact. And humanity was rewriting every rule of engagement. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was a moment of cosmic revelation. Dr. Arya Patel's Quantum Nexus team had been preparing for this moment since the first signs of Zorvak's aggression. Their research station, now a mobile quantum computation hub, drifted at the edge of the solar system, a delicate membrane between human civilization and the approaching storm. "We're not going to fight," she told the global coordination team. "We're going to demonstrate." The Zorvak's assault fleet arrived like a crystalline nightmare. Tens of thousands of vessels constructed from materials that defied traditional understanding of matter and energy. Each ship was a weapon. Each weapon was a statement of technological superiority. Or so they believed. Captain Maya Santos led the human defensive coordination, but her role was nothing like traditional military command. She was more of a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of adaptive intelligence that spread across multiple dimensional planes. The first wave of Zorvak's attacks hit what appeared to be critical human infrastructure: quantum communication relays, planetary defense networks, resource distribution systems. What they encountered was something entirely unexpected. Each attack point became a node of transformation. Zorvak's computational weapons found themselves absorbed, analyzed, and fundamentally altered. They didn't just fail, they evolved. Dr. Kamao Keek's adaptive defense algorithms worked like living organisms. They didn't resist. They communicated. They invited. The Zorvak's fleet found itself caught in a complex web of interactions that defied every known strategic model. Their most sophisticated attack protocols began to generate unexpected outputs, mathematical sequences that seemed to pulse with something approaching consciousness, cultural narratives that rewrote their understanding of conflict. Sub-Coordinator Vexnal, monitoring from the primary command vessel, experienced something unprecedented in Zorvak's collective memory. Confusion. Wonder. Something that approached what biological beings might call emotion. The human response wasn't about destruction. It was about demonstration. A small squadron of adaptive combat units, led by Lieutenant Rafael Santos, engaged the Zorvak's assault formations in a manner that seemed to defy physical laws. They didn't seek to destroy. They sought to communicate. Each defensive maneuver became a complex mathematical dialogue. Each evasive action generated computational sequences that seemed to invite the Zorvak's into a different understanding of interaction. "We're not fighting," Santos transmitted across multiple quantum communication channels. "We're having a conversation." The quantum nexus drive revealed itself not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Humanity demonstrated a capability that went beyond technological superiority. They showed an ability to transform the very nature of conflict. Captain Zexilar watched in growing uncertainty as human defensive units began to generate complex holographic projections. Not threats, not weapons, but invitations to understanding. Indigenous navigation techniques merged with quantum computational models. Ecological understanding danced with advanced theoretical physics. Cultural narratives intertwined with mathematical sequences. The Zorvak's assault began to fragment, not through destruction, through understanding. Some vessels began to generate their own complex communication patterns. Others found themselves absorbed into adaptive human defensive networks. The line between attack and communication became increasingly blurred. Dr. Patel's team had prepared for this moment. Their research wasn't about winning a conflict. It was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about intelligence, about connection, about existence. "We're not here to defeat you," the human transmission suggested. "We're here to invite you into a different way of understanding." The final moments of the confrontation defied every known model of military engagement. The Zorvak's fleet didn't surrender. They didn't retreat. They began to change. As the last assault formations dissolved into complex quantum interactions, humanity stood not as conquerors, but as architects of a new form of cosmic communication. The stars themselves seemed to lean in, listening. The transformation happened slowly, then all at once. In the quantum archives of the Terran Collective, Dr. Elena Rodriguez reviewed the first comprehensive analysis of the post-conflict interactions. It wasn't a report. It was a living document that continued to evolve, to breathe with new understanding. The Zorvacs weren't defeated. They were invited. Ambassador Kai Chen stood at the center of the first true interstellar diplomatic platform, a construct that existed simultaneously as a physical space, a quantum communication network, and a living ecosystem. Around him, representatives from 12 different civilizations observed with a mixture of caution and unprecedented hope. The diplomatic breakthrough wasn't about treaties. It was about reimagining the very nature of galactic interaction. Dr. Fatima al-Rashid's conflict resolution protocols had become the foundation of a new form of interstellar communication. Her team had developed an approach that treated every civilization as a complex, adaptive system rather than a potential threat or resource to be exploited. "We're not creating an alliance," she would explain to skeptical delegates. "We're developing a living network of mutual understanding." The quantum nexus technology proved to be more than a method of transportation. It became a medium of communication that transcended traditional limitations. Civilizations could now share experiences, knowledge, and perspectives in ways that defied previous understanding of information exchange. Sub-Coordinator Vexnal, now part of a revolutionary diplomatic corps, found themselves at the center of this transformation. The Zorvac's collective consciousness was undergoing a fundamental restructuring. What had once been a hierarchical, control-based civilization was becoming something fluid, adaptive, curious. On the restored surface of Earth, now a global park of ecological renewal and technological harmony. Young researchers from multiple species worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable mere decades earlier. A Zorvac's computational specialist collaborated with a human ecological engineer. An indigenous knowledge keeper from the Amazon worked alongside a quantum physicist from what was once called Korea. The galactic communication network that emerged was nothing like previous models of diplomatic or scientific exchange. It was alive, adaptive, a true network of collective intelligence. Captain Maya Santos led the first truly multi-species exploration mission. Her crew represented a cross-section of galactic diversity that would have been impossible to imagine before. They weren't just exploring space. They were building bridges between civilizations. Dr. Arya Patel's quantum nexus research had evolved into something far beyond its original purpose. The technology was now a living system of communication, of exploration, of mutual understanding. Each journey became a dialogue, each exploration a conversation. The economic models that emerged defied traditional understanding. Resources were no longer something to be conquered or hoarded. They became a shared ecosystem of mutual development. Civilizations began to understand that true prosperity wasn't about individual advancement, but collective growth. Rafael Santos, now leading an interstellar ecological restoration project, explained it best during a global transmission. "We're not just exploring space," he said. "We're learning to listen to the universe." The transformation wasn't without challenges. Old patterns of thinking didn't disappear overnight, but the fundamental approach had changed. Conflict became an opportunity for understanding. Difference became a source of strength rather than division. In the quantum archives, Dr. Rodriguez watched the living document of human and galactic evolution continue to write itself. The story wasn't about humanity conquering the stars. It was about humanity inviting the stars to become something more. Captain Zigzlar, now a key figure in the new galactic diplomatic corps, reflected on the journey. The Zorvacs had come seeking to demonstrate their superiority. Instead, they had been invited into a fundamental reimagining of existence. As the first truly integrated galactic communication network began to pulse with life, something became clear. This was just the beginning. The stars themselves seemed to lean in, listening.